All right, 6:30. I'd like to call Parks Board order.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time and effort in coming out tonight. It's great. I think Parks Board is aware of the fact that we're meeting with all of our boards. I think this is board number 3 or 4. I know we did planning and zoning and BAIP. So we've got y'all, and we also have a meeting that starts in an hour. So we need to be efficient, but we will. I'm confident that we'll be able to get through the material. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate the time that you give to the Parks Board, and we knew it was important for you to be able to have a conversation with council and get our input. It helps us all be on the same page and make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction. So, City Manager, if you have any comments you'd like to make? Okay. Josh, is there anything else that you would like to say before we turn things over to Trey?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Mr. Job.
Can you hear me? Let's see if I need to move this up just a little better down. How's that? Is that better? Perfect. Good. So we'll go straight into the work session. What I have here is just a little PowerPoint where we'll talk about some of the accomplishments, what we've been working on, the 2018 work plan that we worked on over the summer, and how we're going to move forward in the future and how it relates to the focus areas that the council put together at their retreat.
Trey,
Yes,
can you
ma'am.
pause just a moment?
Yep.
I apologize. It would be a really good idea if each person would introduce themselves, please, and say your name, and that will give you a chance to see how close you have to get to the mic to be heard, but it'll also help us all put a face with a name. So, Josh, if you don't mind starting on that side of the room.
Josh Gordon, Chairman of the Board.
Allison Hewitt, Youth Representative.
Dorothy Scornulis. Jamie Creasy. Betty Rucker, Secretary. Kelly Dawson.
Jerry Schiff, Mayor Pro Tem.
Deborah Jones, Council Member, Place 5.
Lyle Nelson, Council Member, Place 3.
I'm the mayor, Connie Schrader.
Len Dalble, City Manager.
Bill Ennis, City Council, Place 4.
Thank you. Sorry, Trey. I realized
that's
we should have done that. Thank you so much.
No problem.
You're off.
So, you'll recognize some of this stuff from Fisherman's Park. Again, we can move right into the workshop portion. I want to start with the purpose of the board. The members shall be known and interested in the parks and the recreation of the area for the purpose of the leisure time for citizens here in the city. The duty of the Parks Board is to follow the community, talk to everyone that you know, and try to get a sense of what's going on and what they'd like to see, and then bring recommendations back to council. You also have extra duties, which I didn't mention here, but the tree advisory committee is also a big portion of what you do. So the park board meetings also serve as a place where the citizens can come interact with the Parks Board and find out what they want to know, what's going on. What I have here is just a map of all the parks and our assets that these aren't all city parks, they're all recreation related, some are county. You can look in your packet, there's a map at each one of them. As you can see, we've got quite a few areas and a lot of potential here. We need to decide how we want to move forward with these areas and make sure they all interconnect and things of that nature. Again, I talked about the trees just a second ago. We're in our 7th year in a row as a Tree City USA, which is a big part of what you guys do. You have to be there for the ordinance and things of that nature, which if you've been watching in the recent council meetings, we've been talking about revising the tree ordinance. So you'll be a big part of that here in the future. Some of the accomplishments that have taken place, because you serve on the dual role, we've been honored to be Tree City USA for 7 years. You assisted Barbara, who's not here tonight, home with the flu, was the liaison for the board to the Arts and Public Places Board, where we participated in the Cultural Arts Walk. 2015 Open Space and Master Plan that was revamped. And then our future goals is to receive public input on the new sports plaza, which we touched on that January the 4th at our meeting. And what we'll do is start getting the schedule for all the public meetings. Hope everybody wants to attend, and we can talk about how that's going to move forward. We've developed and updated the policy to reflect the priorities of the community and the council. And what all that means basically is once we get to the priorities here, we're going to have a big discussion on how we move forward to make that happen. and how they relate to the comp plan, how they relate to our master plan, and how they relate to the council goals. I'd also like, in the near future, this is going to be a big topic we're going to discuss tonight, is working on a business plan on how we can designate a funding source for the park system as we move forward. That's going to be crucial to us being able to expand and grow. There's only so much money to go around, and it's going to be up to us to make sure that we do what we can to make that happen and give everybody that's here a nicer, better park system they'd like to see. Also, we've talked about exploring a bike share program. We'd like to have one at each of the parks for some alternate transportation. We can have one there at the carts station. Just make sure that there's several locations over the city. You saw at the map how many parks and areas that we have that we can share. It could be a great program, an easy way to get people back and forth and help with some of that traffic as we grow. So our work plan items for this year that we've already been working on is a revised special events ordinance and the procedures to meet the financial policy. So what that means is we've been tracking since this year has started all of the special events and what the city puts into man hours, equipment, extra time, not just the hard dollar costs, but also the soft dollar costs. And I can tell you just from Lost Pines Christmas, that month-long event was somewhere around $34,000. So that was the city's contribution, and that's something that's taken away from the tax dollar that we can use in another resource. So that's the kind of things we'll be looking to revise to be fiscally responsible, which is one of the council priorities. We're going to complete the trail to the state park. I know Jamie's especially excited about that, being our state park representative. The plan is to get that taken care of in fiscal year 18, which we're doing the engineering this year, and hopefully go to construction by 2020. To expand the Parks and Recreation trail opportunities, and anybody that's looked at their comp plan and looked in Chapter 7, that's exactly what it talks about. It's connectivity between all the park systems so that we can connect everybody to downtown, any of the local businesses, and back to the park system, and any recreation opportunities that the city can offer. So we haven't done this yet, but we do plan to have we did have the annual Boards and Commissions banquet, but we have not had the volunteer opportunity where we're going to have a fair once a year, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Maybe Ms. Humble will expand, but what we'd like some of you to do is volunteer and come in, and as the new members or people that would like to be on a board, all the boards would come together, and you tell them what you do and how important it is, and they get to go around and pick the one that they want, because maybe their best fit's not parks, maybe their best fit is PNC, and they'll find out the kind of stuff and what it takes to be a part of the community. And we want you to make sure you're there to help share that experience and things of that nature.
So I'm going to interrupt him. It is July 17th at 7 p.m. So everyone's calendars appreciate advance notice. So July 17th, that's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. and it'll be at the Convention Center.
And let me put this in a little context for you. One of the things that Mayor Schrader has made a real conscious effort to do is involve more people in the boards and commissions. And what we have found is that a lot of people will apply for what they know is available, not understanding that there may be a better fit with their skill set and their passion. But if that's all they know, that's what they apply for. So what we're going to do is mail out a citywide newsletter on July 1st that educates the entire citizenry on the board and commission opportunities that are available. What are the names of the boards? What are their purpose? What are their goals? What are some opportunities to get involved? Because we're really interested in matching your passion with our purpose. And we will have we're calling it a board and commission fair, but it's a trade show. And each one of the boards and commissions will have a table and a display that educates you to the purpose and how much time it takes, because not all boards are equal. Planning and zoning gets a large packet, and you have to spend time going and investigating the development opportunities versus another board that might have a little less of a requirement. So that will give everybody an opportunity to check out our boards and commissions. We're also opening it to other volunteer organizations that are our community partners, because it takes a village to make all of this work. And so it's an opportunity for them as well. And we'll have an application so that all of our citizens can go around and be informed. They will submit the application, and then the council has blocked off several evenings to interview those that are interested in applying. Two things that happen. One is it gives council an opportunity to put a face with a name, and again, ask the basic question of what is it you'd like to do. And it's been my experience with the interview process. Again, this is when we find out, well, I applied for the Board and Commission of Planning and Zoning because my neighbor's planning and zoning, but really what I want to do is X. Oh, okay, well, that's this over here, and it just so happens, you know, that would be great. Oh, I didn't know. Well, thank you very much. And our charter says that the mayor makes the appointment, but it is incumbent on the council to affirm the appointment. And so, again, this gives council an opportunity to, in a 15-minute segment, interview all of the applicants. So your involvement in that is critically important, because we need you excited about the initiatives that you're working on, and help people understand, based on their time requirements, what they can and can't contribute. Some people work and can't get here at 6:30. Well, your meeting starts at 6:30, so you can't apply here. So those are the kinds of things that I think Trey is encouraging you to come and sell the park board, and why it's important to be involved, and the reward, hopefully, that you get back. So thank you.
Thank you. Also, I just want to back up to expand the parks trails, the park and recreational trail opportunities, even complete the trail to the state park. Every time we've done a parks master plan since 2000, that has been the top #1 requested activity that everybody wants. They want more trails, they want more nature trails, or they want more connectivity between all the parks in the system. So I think this is a high priority. There's lots of grant opportunities for that. And again, I just want to point out that what the community talks about every time we mention it. Every time we talk about recreation, that's the go-to and the #1 score every time we hold the survey. We're also this year on our work plan, which we have not started on yet, would be to develop a private initiative to program and operate the city's rodeo arena. And what that means is, let me expand on that just a little bit. As you know, before, the rodeo arena was run by private entities more than once. And 2016, I believe it was, the city took the rodeo arena back over, did some repairs, fixed a few things up, and just doesn't have the manpower or the capacity to keep it open the way that the folks want to keep it open. So what we decided to do is go back, let's review all those contracts, let's get together and talk about how we can make that happen so that, and set them up for success. Whether that means that that's a small budget that takes care of keeping this open, and they do the scheduling and that nature, and then we just work out the deal and basically end up where it's not such a burden on the city staff, which they don't have anybody that can run that full time. And I think it'd be a lot better for the community, because somebody wants it open every day. And we just don't have the manpower to staff to keep it open every day. But that's something that they could schedule and they could maintain, whoever this private partnership is with. I think would serve the community, at least that small section of the community that likes to ride every day, or at least a couple times a week, and work out their horses and things of that nature. So.
About that. And so what does that look like? Does that look like the Parks Board putting that to, you know, how is that going to move forward? Because I know that's a really, really important part of the community to a lot of people that I've spoken to. Just like the state park, the arena is a real function.
Honestly, this might not be something that comes to the park board, because it's not as easy as what is presented.
Right.
And there are some contractual obligations that we have in the background that make this not easy for public sausage making. And that's what policy making in public is. It's complicated. So this would be one that I would say probably will be handled internally and at a council level. because we're going to have to renegotiate some commitments we have that go beyond the scope of the authority of the Parks Board. And I was just fixing to say that.
Okay, so to be clear, it's not something that we're putting in their court. It's something that you would deal with once it's put together.
Potentially, and
Potentially.
that depends on how the background contracts get handled. But what
Okay.
I would say to you is it is important, it's on your priority list, but I think it's a council level engagement, not a park board. And that's
Okay.
just because of the background that we've got to work through.
No, I agree. I just wanted to get some clarification
Yes,
ma'am.
on
And
the
you're,
work plan.
because of how complex it is, this is in our work plan, which is the only reason we pointed out. We are not ready to bring it back to council yet, but that's what we'll be working on the rest of this year, in time to bring it back. And then again, just to tell you where we're at on the Will Sports Complex in Fisherman's Park, we've awarded the contract has been signed, we've had our first meeting. They're setting a schedule for all the public engagement. Instead of just 2 meetings, we've had 4. We've had a lot of discussion about this over the years, so we want to make sure we get it right. We want to have several meetings in several different areas where the community can come together and talk about their concerns. And then it also have a lot more uses than just a place to skate. So that's where we're at on that. Now we can go to 2B and we can talk about,
Go back, because we're not ready for 2B.
all right, let's back up.
Go back one. Let's weigh in here just a little bit on the future goals, because I think there's some policy discussions to be had between City Council and the Park Board. Let's start with, and I don't see the one I'm thinking about, but one of the priorities that Council has established is an alternative funding source for our parks. And the challenge that we have is 1 penny on our tax rate generates $86,300. So that's not a lot of money when you multiply that times 54. It just does not make a lot of money. Our number one revenue source is sales tax, and it's 41%. It's about $4.4 million. So the challenge that council posed to me at their retreat that got in the work plan is getting out of our box and figuring out a way to generate revenue for our parks. I happen to subscribe to the philosophy that parks could sustain themselves. Park programming offered correctly is really based on the users who experience it. And you can generate revenue from vendor contracts. You can generate revenue from user fees. There are just a number of ways that parks can generate revenue. And from a government standpoint, we're always, oh, no, we shouldn't do that. But yet we all join the gym, pay $35 a month and never go and never think twice about it. So one of the things that I want council and park board to talk about is that and what does it mean? Because it can mean 1,000 things to 1,000 different people. And in the sausage making process, it would be helpful if there was some conversation and direction more about the sacred cows. Is there anything we can't consider? Or are we open to whatever? So that when y'all get the opportunity to debate that and begin to really get in the minutia of that, you're set up for success, and y'all don't spend weeks coming up with this perfect plan and it get brought to council only for them to go, oh no, that's the one thing we didn't want y'all to do. So with that, Mayor, I will kind of punt that and let y'all talk about that and what that means to y'all and why it was important.
So, council, let's kind of take those and maybe let's start with user fees. Gary, do you have an opinion about if we would, is there any use, are you okay with the user fee, or would you never be okay with a user fee?
Well, I think if we do a user fee, it would have to be on a limited basis, because I think there are a lot of people in the community that aren't going to be able to afford paying a user fee. But I think if we can provide basic park amenities, playground areas, and those kinds of things on a free basis, and then have other aspects of our park system that were member oriented, I think that would be okay. We just have to stay focused on providing adequate recreation for the community, whether they can afford it or not.
So I hear you saying if my family's in Bastrop and I decide I want to go to a picnic at the park and my kids get to play on some playground equipment, you don't want them to have to come out, shell out some money to do something as simple as that.
That's what I think, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Jones, any comments on user fees?
Yeah, overall, I'm against user fees, but there's certain things that we could specifically target, and I'll give an example. Let's say that we do the bicycle program and we let the convention center be the hub for that. And ultimately, and I think we've talked about this, but, all the hotels on the highway, that's where they drop people off. They can grab a bicycle, they can go around town, and you have to put in your debit card, and it might only cost you $1, but it creates some sort of accountability for who has that bike and that bike being returned. And then there's some revenue generated for that. I mean, it needs to be nominal, because you want to encourage people to use it, but it's going to be something that's not going to hurt them, And it might be the same thing with the skate park. You might want to fence that off and people subscribe to it, but that subscription to the park includes insurance, So you get something for that. So your kids can use it. They're safe. It's generating income, and then they are participating in the policy of any sort of injuries, So, I would be same thing with the arena. There's a user's fee when you use the arena, but by and large for the park itself, I just think it needs to be free.
Councilmember Nelson?
Well, if it's the incidental use of our citizens, certainly should not be a user fee. But if it sets aside a part of the park or the entire park or the entire facility for the exclusive use of a particular group, then yes, there should be some charge to that. But the incidental use by our citizens of the park and the amenities of the park, that's a benefit of being a citizen of this community.
Okay, Councilmember Ennis?
I agree wholeheartedly with all three of the other council members. I think Councilman Nelson said it probably the best, and as I would say it, I think we have to leave our parks open for folks to enjoy themselves. Some of our citizens, I would say the majority of citizens that use the parks, a fee would be hard for them to handle. I do believe that there's an inventive way to come up, like Gary said and Deb said. We ought to come up with avenues to raise money in special events or special usage, but not on a regular basis.
Okay, and I'll share my opinion on that is things like the bikes. I would think if you want to do a bike share, it ought to fund itself, and it ought to be to the point you don't want it to be astronomical. It shouldn't be this huge money maker. But the fact of the matter is, if you live in Bastrop and you like to ride a bike, most of the time you will have a bike. And there may be some people that, honestly, my kid's only going to do it 3 times a year, and I don't want to store a bike, but so I am willing to pay a nominal fee. So, if you've come to town, I think when it's something specific like that, when it's additional equipment and that type of thing. But in my opinion, which I think you're hearing consistently from council, if it's something like a picnic, playing on some playground equipment, walking on a trail, I can just hear that's what I pay my city taxes for. So I don't think there should be a user fee associated with something like that. But exclusive use, reserving a pavilion, that type of thing, or I'm using a bike, I'm responsible for a bike, I want to get it back. I think we'll have a much better result if there's some sort of a fee, and you have a dog in the hunt, and we know who you are and what bike you got on, and it worked, and now it doesn't, and we need to have a conversation. So, Josh and the board, do you guys have any questions or any, there's always two sides to a coin. So if you have, it's better to visit with us now than to don't leave the room and be like, I can't believe they said that. So.
No, I agree with everything that's been said by the council so far. If someone's coming, they just want to play on the playground, swings, something like that, that of course should be free. Like you said, just part of paying your taxes. But yes, say renting out the baseball fields for a couple hours for practice, or if a group is renting out the soccer fields or something like that, where that's exclusive to whatever group that is. Also, anytime we have, sometimes companies use our park. I can't remember, like the Gladiator company or some of these boot camps and stuff, that they're using our park, but they're charging money to use our facilities. I think we need to get some compensation from that. About the bikes, I think there's companies now that's turnkey where they set up the stations and the bikes, and basically they would take maybe 50% and we would take 50%. So the city itself doesn't put any money into it. We would just get the profit, and they would, share.
I will resoundingly tell you, programs that you bring us where the city puts no money into it and we can get a little out, that's pretty much you're going to get those approved.
So, so if I can help, just so what you've all talked about in user fees is exactly what we already do. So but what we need to do, and what I think is going to be important, and the board and the council are going to have to come together and agree on what that fee looks like. So special events, for instance, like we talked about, there's 72 of them a year, and we subsidize those quite a bit with city staff. And it's not just the soft dollars, it's the time that they could be doing something else. So that's the kind of information we're going to be bringing to you, and that's where we're going to have to reestablish those fees and talk about it.
Let me see if I can quantify this into something that's pretty clear. I think what the council is asking for is for us to put together that basic package that's free. And we define it, we know what it looks like, we know what goes in it. Excuse me.
And in your packet, I'm sorry, is actually the ordinance that goes over the commercial use of the park, if anybody wants
Yes.
to read through that.
And then the enhanced fee structure of what are we willing to choose or to charge for. And I loved your examples, because anytime a group is expecting access at a specific time and a specific time limit, that should come at a price, because they're denying the public the ability to walk up and do that. There are some other programs that are untapped avenues. Just like you said, they're making money off of our park, and we ought to share in that revenue stream. So I think that provides some perspective for the direction. I think that the place that, because you are a policy recommendation body to this council, I think what would be helpful to them in the relationship of the question that Trey asked, and that is, what is the right fee? I think the question is driven by what is the market used to spending on that. And I think we have to wage an argument as to why we're less than, equal to, or above market. Because in some instances, we have assets or resources that are way better than the market, and we ought to charge a premium for it. There are probably things that we don't quite meet the market, and we ought to discount for. So that would be the policy direction that I think council would want to see from you, is not just that we're going to charge a fee, but to Trey's point, what is that fee, and what was the methodology that you as a board came to the conclusion that you would recommend this, and it passes the smell test, and the citizen calling the mayor, I pay taxes for this, what's her argument going to be to defend that? So I think that this was a good discussion as to the direction and the kind of feedback that they need on that.
Excuse me, I have something to say about that. I think that in the past, my opinion is that we should be contacting the people that are using our parks. I don't put as much value on what other communities are charging and what they're doing, but I do put a premium on what our citizens think and what our citizens are willing to pay and what they're doing. I mean, if they're doing an in-the-park fun play day for boot camp and they're not charging for that and we're going to charge them $50, I mean, that's not good, you know, and I can say this from having my conference center, you know, I have people call me all the time that want to use it and they're, oh, that's too much. I'm like, well, what do you want to pay? You know, I think you have to have that discussion with the specific people that are using it. So I don't put a lot of stock in calling around Central Texas and go, well, this is what Austin charges, or this is what, you know, our citizens are specific, you know, and that's what I want to cater to. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I think we got in a lot of trouble with the convention center, just sort of shopping out everybody's fee, and we ended up with it being empty because our fees were just not in step with a lot of what was going on here.
If that's going to be the example we're going to use, I'm going to tell you most of what you shopped wasn't equivalent to what you had across the street. So I think that the shopping has to be based on apples to apples. So
no, that's right. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there, that I think that those are the people I'm going to be the most interested in. If, you know, we're going to charge for a festival, go to that festival and say, what do you think is reasonable? Because that's a lot of work, putting those together and getting that money. And
yeah, but the problem that you have with that is that if you ask them how much are you willing to pay, they're going to say, I'll give you $1.50.
No, I don't think that. No, I don't think that's true. I think people really want to participate. I mean, I don't think that's accurate.
Councilmember Jones, I would caution that if we don't have some definitive fees, then it turns into your best friend got it for $1 and Gary's best friend got it for $3.50, and you're putting a city employee in the position of negotiating
not having
that.
definitive fees. I'm just talking about the process of determining those fees.
Okay.
I'm not talking about willy-nilly, we're going to charge you whatever. I'm just talking about the process of coming up with those fees.
I understand Deb's point, but I'm one of those people, process guys, that loves to have a benchmark. And I think, to Linda's point, the only thing we'd be doing there is finding out just kind of, are we in the ballpark? Are we way out of line? And I mean, we can set the rate any way we want to.
Well,
but
and I tell you what, the market will tell you if it's too high. Now, they're not going to tell you if it's too low. You'll find out if it's too low.
Right.
You'll be booked all the time. But if
That's
it's
where
too
we're
high,
at.
you will find out, like we did at the convention center. You will find out, and then you'll make some adjustments if you messed up, if you set the fees too high.
You hit that right on the head. That's why we have 72 to 74 bids a year, because it is incredibly cheap.
Yes.
So
Well, and Mayor Pro Tem,
we are overshopped.
it's an excellent point and a reason that you can't do it once. And it's something that I believe as the Parks Board, you guys should do on an annual basis, is take a look at those fees. Where did they come from? Are they working? Are we overbooked? Are we underbooked? But we shouldn't wait for it to be a problem and then we're talking about it again. We all review our budgets on an annual basis. I think you guys that's something that you should annually have a point of looking at, and I'm sure Trey will help you know when you need to look at them, because from a timing point for us to do budgeting, and there's a better time of the year to look at that than there is not. But I think you're exactly right. It's something that needs to be reviewed regularly.
And I think the policy can include, if it's a private event, it's one rate. If it's a nonprofit, it's another rate. If it's a school event, it may not have any charge at all, or what, we can scale it.
But we should have consistent categories
set
and
the rules,
definitions. Yes.
You set it up, you determine, and you're going to find within the first probably few weeks, we missed this one, or we missed that one. It's going to have to be a work in progress that evolves as we learn how this works.
And I think the data, Trey, that you talked about that you'll have that we don't currently have, which is those 72 events cost us, and honestly, unless they all cost us exactly the same, if we can know, like, it's a weekend event costs us X amount of dollars, that can help us make good decisions as well. Because something, if we're willing to pay that event cost us, but maybe the level of participation, or, you know, like I would say like July 4th, we're going to have fireworks. It's going to happen. But there may be some events that you think you're going to draw in a lot of people. If you don't, and it costs us a lot, and it's not visited, then that's something that needs to be looked at.
And then it needs to also consider the hotel motel, the hot funds. You know, is the event, can it be fun, you know, is it drawing in people that are using the hotels and motels in the community? So can some of the expenses of the city be offset by hot funds? We really need to kind of delve into that and determine how best to pay for these events, and you know, without penalizing these nonprofit. You know, it's a complex equation, I believe.
And we just merged 2 work plan items, so let me separate and see if we can't get this back on track. So the item is to work on a business plan that will result in a dedicated funding source for the park system. That seems like a fairly innocuous statement, but you've got Councilmember Jones with one opinion, Mr. Efficiency, Mayor Pro Tem Gary Schiff, that comes at it from a completely different angle, and then the rest of the council somewhere in the middle. So my reason for doing this was to help you appreciate the dynamics of the conversation that are going to occur when you take something that looks like a fairly benign item and bring back what could be. And it is that balance between what do taxpayers pay for and what don't they really pay for. And so the bottom line is that if we don't generate money and we don't find another revenue source, your parks look just like they're going to look 15 years from now. We don't have the ability to get any more money out of the money we currently are doing. We just don't. And we're growing, and every day there are new stresses on the system. So the challenge here is to get out of the box and fund something we don't have creatively. Now, on the special events ordinance and fees, which was the second part of this scenario that got merged, there is a constitutional requirement that says public funds will not be expended for private purpose. We are failing that. I can tell you that today. We are subsidizing a number of organizations who raise money for scholarships. Taxpayers' money is not intended for scholarships. It doesn't matter how wonderful that organization is and all of the children we're going to help. Not what taxpayers' money is intended for. So part of the challenge with this particular item is we're going to have to go back and remember the rules of engagement and then determine what taxpayers are going to pay for with their tax. And then for those that we think have secondary value, which are the things that Mayor Pro Tem Schiff talked about that are destination-oriented things, those will be sent somewhere else perhaps to get a different source of funding. But this special events ordinance and fee is nothing more the general fund and the Constitution of the United States, or the state of Texas in this case, have to be in sync. So this is going to be a black and white conversation that isn't black and white with a ton of gray matter that's going to pull at your heartstrings. Because I guarantee every one of you are involved in an organization that we're inappropriately subsidizing, that is going to be impacted negatively. But it is what it is. We don't make the rules. We just get paid to enforce the rules, and we get, y'all get appointed to make recommendations that are what they are. It's not personal, and we can't make this personal. So we will be providing documentation to you based on a cycle of life, that here's the event and here's what it really cost us. And we can quantify that based on the hours and the people that were invested in it and all of the responsibilities that went to it. And then we can show you the fee. And then I think y'all are going to go, oh, we're leaving a lot of money on the table. It's going to be 6 figures before we're done. No doubt about it. So then the case becomes, what is the right answer to ensure that the Constitution is being met, and we're not inappropriately allocating those tax dollars. The unintended consequence of that, or the intended consequence of that, is we won't have 71 events. We'll have something more like 10 or 15. And so we just have to go into that knowing that we're not going to like the outcome, but that's not the point of the exercise. The ones that then don't fit, we'll have to see if there is a way that we can assist those that meet the criteria of the hotel occupancy tax, or the community service that BP&L provides, or some other source that might do it. So I want to make sure we keep those separate, because they're really, you're going to have to, as a board, approach them with two different sets of prioritizations and policies that will guide that discussion.
So, to be clear, this is like y'all, the number one task that the Parks Board has over this next year is the funding. Is that
is on your that is on your priority list, and so it falls under their jurisdiction based on the priority list that y'all gave me during the retreat.
So a lot of the other things like the skate park or the rodeo arena or the trail, those are tasks that the city itself is already working on, that they'll eventually hand off. But what the main task of the board is just this funding structure and coming up with some sort of working plan that we can put together. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think they get to touch all of this year. I think the funding sources are probably going to be standing agenda items, because that's not going to be something you're going to solve in a meeting or two. I think the trails, as we get the engineers on board, and they will review the plans, be the conduit for the public meetings and those kinds of things, and that schedule will be established and scheduled on their agenda. And the same thing with the Wheeled Sports Plaza. So all of these things are in this year's work plan. We all know they're not going to get done. Some will get finished, some will carry over. They'll be tired of talking about some of them by the time they're done.
So I'm going to move forward to 2B,
Okay.
which is what we were talking about, was a dedicated funding source. But just to click over to those priorities, so everybody has a view of what they look like. It talks about the mission. This is the focus areas that the council dialed into to give you some talking points while you continue your discussion about how you're going to do the funding, and that was being fiscally responsible, economic vitality. You need to keep all this in mind when you're thinking how you can improve the park system and how they meet each one of these focus areas. Are we communicating to our public enough? What is uniquely Bastrop about our park system? What's special? For instance, we have a state park so close to the city. You know, that's a good one there. The organizational excellence, multimodal mobility. Try to say that fast 3 times. And that's the bike share, and that's the extra sidewalk. That's the things that and community safety. Again, a unique environment, and then how we manage the growth. So as we're growing, if you'll notice, now a lot of our regions, our service areas overlap. But as we grow, we're going to have to think about how the park system is going to grow with that, and how we're going to tie it all back together. So with that in mind, this is your focus areas, and we can get back to the topic of discussion.
One of the things that I want to punctuate these 9 focus areas of this is, yes, your title is Parks Board, but the bike share program also impacts transportation with the multimodal mobility. The trail system ties into the commitment that council and the community has to enhance our walkability. So it's the sidewalk connections, it's the trails, it's the trail around the river, it's the trail to the state park. Those are transportation elements, but they're also part of the parks. And so one of the cautionary tales I like to educate some of our boards is to not look at it solely as what happens in Fisherman's Park or solely what happens in Bob Bryant Park. A great park system becomes an economic development generator, a community development generator. And so y'all will be touching way more than just the park systems as you debate those items. And so these 9 focus areas really are important for you to think about, because the end user may be somebody in your park, but it also might be a visitor that's providing tourist dollars and participating from a community development perspective.
And as you know, it talks about in the Chapter 7 of the comp plan how we're going to review the river corridor. So that's an excellent opportunity to expand on. It helps with the growth. It helps with the Riverwalk, the mobility. It's not a dedicated funding source. So with that in mind, I know you had some discussion about that previously. So when you feel like you're getting talked out all night, you are welcome to throw something back the other way if you've got any ideas. I know you had some items you wanted to discuss, so feel free to continue.
There has been discussion in our meetings about the new developments that are coming in. I happen to live in one of those, Pecan Park, and I understand that Pecan Park has a dedicated space for a park, but I also understand this is a clarification question, if the developer comes in, does not wish or want to develop a park, what happens?
The way the ordinance is written and the way it's likely to be written in the future may be two different things. So let me address where, as your city manager, I'm going to work to make it happen. Yes, there is a dedicated park in the Pecan Park, but it is fluid and it seems to be shoving itself back in the back corner. Nothing irritates me more as a city manager to get what's left over that you can't sell. Parkland has value. Parkland programmed right and positioned well will add 20% value to property taxes and help maintain that property value for many years. So it's not the floodplain that you don't want. It needs to be a prescribed amenity. That subdivision is recently sold. We have met with the new developers, and there are two things that have to happen in Pecan Park fairly quickly or we're going to be at a stalemate. One is the park and one is connectivity. And we've got to make those two things happen fairly quickly. We have had a really exciting conversation with the new developer because he gets that park. He has had some preliminary conversations with Wesley Brandon, our city engineer, and Wesley has indicated to me probably in the next couple of weeks he's going to come back with a drawing. There may be an opportunity to open up that plan development and have planning and zoning and council look at something a little differently. Because one of the things the comp plan tells us is that we need managed growth. And we know from a sustainability standpoint that density done right and done well helps pay for this expensive infrastructure that we need. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question is, if they don't want to dedicate parks, can they make a contribution to parkland dedication? And the answer is yes. What I want us to get into a position of doing is helping to make that decision for the developer, because if they're not willing to give us property we want, I would rather have the money so y'all can invest in program. I'm not sure our ordinance today says that, so if it doesn't, in part of our rewrites, we're working on that, because if you can't tell, I'm passionate about parkland done right and done well. From a sustainability long-term adds value, and we need sustainable property values in any community. And so they need to be done right, programmed well, they need to be safe, and they don't need to be a long-term code enforcement nightmare for the city. So that's where we're going, and if we're not able to do that, you'll see that, and we'll review that. That would then go to planning and zoning as well, because I think that's very important.
So I can tell you, what the ordinance says now is it's $250 per unit. So it's what they have to pay. However, the state law requires you to, when they dedicate those funds, it has to service that area. So that's why when I was talking about the park service area, that's important. So what you can do with that money is make it a destination park. So if there's something along the river that's going to attract everybody and everybody's going to use it, absolutely illegal use of those funds, because as you travel farther west, there's no river. Not for quite a while anyway. So, so what that means is those funds could be dedicated there. That's the kind of choices that we'll have to make. Do we want parkland here? And sure, we want some. We always want a little recreation in each neighborhood. But what's the highest and best use for those funds? Or would we prefer land into something else that we need to mow, and we have the resources for that? So.
Dorothy, did you have anything else on your list?
Well, I've got a long list, but I think what it is more process and ideas for funding. Sales tax, dedicating a penny, half a penny to the parks. That can generate quite a bit of money, and everybody pays for it. One of my concerns is, having lived in the county and used these beautiful facilities in the city, I didn't really pay for it. So I think if we did stats on who's using the park, we'll probably find more county residents than we are city residents.
It's nearly 70% county.
Yeah, it's 70% from the county use it.
Which,
So-
Dorothy, is my argument for why we need to annex the people that don't want to be annexed, is they want to use our services but don't want to pay for it. And that we're fast reaching the point that we can't sustain that.
Goes for roads and everything. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what we're not taking advantage of, because, the 4th of July, we could have more booths. People would be putting food trucks up and stuff that we could be getting revenue that guests, people from outside the county, or, from Cedar Creek or wherever in the county that aren't paying for the parks, are coming in and utilizing that park, but they're also investing and buying things while they're here. So I think that's probably one of the missing components that we're not utilizing. I know in Fisherman's Park we have this huge kitchen that just sits, useless year round, that people could be renting out and selling things, for the big events and I know there's some liability and, food and FDA and all that, but if we could get more details and say, how are we using these things to get more money? In the day-to-day, people just showing up and playing on the playground. We're not going to have somebody charging to get in the gate. But, for those big events where everybody's coming from all over the county because, Bastrop has the biggest fireworks, that's when we can really take advantage and start getting
And that's
some
those
money.
vendor contracts that everybody was
Yeah,
talking
that's
about.
what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's a great example of you charge a vendor for the opportunity to sell somebody something, and if you just want to come see the fireworks, it doesn't cost you anything. But if you want to be able to buy a $5 piece of pizza, knock yourself out. So that to me, that's a win-win, because you're not imposing a fee on someone. Everyone gets the benefit of it. But if we can have some additional funding sources from those vendors, it would be helpful.
I just thought about something that might work on something like that, which is setting up satellite parking that you charge people, and setting up buses to bring people in, because that's a huge problem, is parking. And that's a way, there's ways that you can think of, and, people coming in from out of town, if you had to pay $5 to park and you got a ride to town, and then you got to spend money on food and stuff. But I think there's ways that you can think of to charge people for events. Parking's probably one of the, more obvious ones, but.
I think this is the direction we were all going,
Yeah.
the council was going, the way you're talking.
But I will say it's very hard to, user fees, and you're getting dollars and cents here, but me and my family moved from Austin because of the parks. So, because of, I kayaked from Fisherman's to Tahitian one time, and we ended up buying a house. And if our mortgage was through First National Bank, 95% of our income would be going, to Bastrop. So, but that wouldn't be taken into account, but my family, one of us utilizes usually Fisherman's or Jewel's almost every day.
That's the beauty of having you guys on the committee, because you bring a different perspective and you represent the full cross-section of the community, which is exactly what we were after. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's 7:25. Does anybody else have something on their list that they were really hoping they could visit about?
Well, I'd like to say how much I appreciate each and every one of you, how valuable you are. This is amazing that you would give your time like this. And I know what it feels like because I'm giving my time too. So,
Dorothy, were you going to say something else?
I had one more comment. The county now has parks. Maybe there could be discussion between the city and the county to come up with a half-cent tax. That way, the county residents and the city residents would be helping to pay for Bastrop parks. Now, I do know that we have other cities in the county. They may want to take advantage of such a discussion.
And my response back to you, ma'am, is I think that's a great idea, and perhaps as a park board, y'all could vet that and bring that back to us so that we had something to talk to the county about.
Okay, council, do you have anything else to share?
Nothing else. In working with this group or attending their meetings and listening sessions, this is a very vocal and engaged group, and I think any feedback that we get from this group is going to be valued and should be taken into consideration with any decisions that we make. Thank y'all.
Can I add one more thing? I know
Please.
you're wrapping up, but just in everything that we discuss as the board and in hopes that what we bring to y'all is just to remember also of our looking at our parks in a bigger as a system, you know, in looking at how the city parks also tie into the county parks, the LCRA, the state park, in that everything plays its role and the values that those different parks bring. And that's just always a big topic that we're discussing, and how those play together, and how as a whole, one of those unique things in our community is that we have a lot of those opportunities that vary from other places. And so bringing that together. And so I just wanted to share for you all that that's always something that we're discussing too in some of those decisions.
I think that's great. And the one thing that Linda didn't mention when she was talking about some of the new developments, when you properly place those parks, by definition, you have the connectivity that you need. And that is consistently one of the things that we hear is it's great that we have so many parks and they're in different places, but the connectivity between them, and that, to your point, includes the state park. That's why we're working on the trail. People who use parks want to use all the parks and want to easily have the ability to get to the next park. And we all know from sitting on council, that's the type of thing that allows us to have economic stability and economic development, and allows people to kayak and then come buy a house here.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to have some connectivity with those parks and the entire park system. So I really appreciate that comment.
The connectivity would also create the less driving, so you wouldn't have to have parking fees. They'd be walking if they had the trails to walk on safely.
Absolutely. And we'd be healthier, just saying.
And people would be spending more time, which then they would buy lunch or dinner on Main Street or whatever, and then instead of just visiting one park, you'd spend a couple hours visiting 3 or 4.
If I have to walk to each park, I agree. I have to sit down at least every 30 minutes. I'm with you.
It's like IKEA. If you walk around enough, eventually you're going to spend up in the cafeteria.
Thank you guys again so very, very much. I'm calling the council meeting adjourned. Josh?
Yes, we're adjourned as well.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, cemetery board, you have a whole minute to get to the table. We'll start up here in just a second. Okay, being respectful of everyone's time, it is 7:33, and I have Councilmember Peterson wasn't able to be with us tonight, but I do have the rest of the dais here with me this evening, so I'm calling the city council portion of this meeting to order. And I apologize. Who is the chair?
I'll call the Fairview Cemetery Advisory Board to order.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sanders. So I needed to read, and that would have been helpful. With the other meeting, one of the things I need to call to your attention, and I know it's annoying, but you are really going to have to get close to the microphone or it won't be picked up on the audio system, and they certainly won't be able to hear you at home. So I know it's a little awkward, but please lean into the mic. With your permission, Mr. Sanders, would your board please introduce themselves, and we'll do the same.
Would you like to go first?
Mary Williams.
Marvell Wembley, Tom Scott, Terry Sanders,
Cheryl Long.
yes, that's us.
Thank you. Gary?
Oh.
We'll keep going.
It was going that way. It has to go. Gary Schiff, Mayor Pro Tem.
Deborah Jones, council member, place 5.
Lyle Nelson, council member, place 3.
Connie Schrader, I'm the mayor.
Linda Umble, city manager.
Bill Ennis, council member, place 4.
Tracy Waldron, Chief Financial Officer.
All right. With that, Tracy, are you going to do any bit of kickoff for our presentation?
Yes, I just wanted to introduce our presenter tonight, Mindy Bonine, with Amatera, and they will be, they're who we have contracted with to do the ground truthing and sonar, and so she just wanted to do a short presentation and address any questions that y'all might have.
I think you're going to have to relocate away from that speaker right there. That is the problem. That would be great, and if you wanted to move over there, that'd probably be even better.
I would like to preface with the PowerPoint that was in the agenda. Heather put this together. She has given y'all a ton of information that I think will be very helpful to you, but we will not be reading or talking about all that's on these slides. So,
okay, yes, in fact, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of...
Hang on just a
Can you
second.
stop?
Colin?
Colin, what is different about this with her that wasn't there with Trey?
Okay. There, is that better? Work with that? Okay. Yes, there's a lot of excellent information on these next couple of slides, and I'm pretty much just going to summarize what we have been contracted to do at the Fairview Cemetery. Our job comes in 2 parts. The first part is the ground penetrating radar, or GPR for short, and the second part is to ground truth that GPR data. And essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the GPR and we are going to run it across the approximately 1 acre. Yep.
Test, test.
How's that? Much better? Okay. So our project is in 2 phases. The first phase is the ground penetrating radar. And basically it's a machine that kind of looks like the one on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It's kind of like a glorified lawnmower that sends radar waves into the ground and has a receiver that senses any return of those waves from any object that has a change in density underneath the ground. And it can also pinpoint where it is and how deep that ping comes back. And once we get that data, we kind of come up with a map, very much like the bar that's in the middle. This is a profile view, which GPR does best. You can extrapolate the profile view and turn it into a plan view. So if you're trying to examine something that is in plan, it is possible to extrapolate that data, but profile view is by far the best, and that's definitely the method that we're going to be using here, because pretty much what we're trying to find is if there's any disturbances underneath the ground, how deep they are, and exactly where they are. And the GPR is excellent at being able to do that. The conditions for this work, this particular kind of method, is pretty good at the section of the Fairview Cemetery that we're going to be analyzing. The soils are mostly sandy, loamy soils, which are much better suited for this method than clay soils, which have a greater density and it's kind of harder to track. And it's a maintenance ground. It's flat land and it's mowed, so we don't have to worry about vegetation or deep root systems of trees and things like that. So, so we are basically, it's a two-man team. We'll take about 3 days. We're going to run the GPR in linear north-south lines all the way across the 1 acre plot that we're trying to analyze. And then we'll come up with a map that looks pretty much like that. And anywhere where we have a hit or a disturbance, as you can see in some of the examples, we're going to map those, and then we're going to select a few of them to analyze more closely to ground truth, the data that we see. And that's the next phase of our project. And we are not intending, nor we have, any interest in excavating every hit that we find. What we're trying to do is verify that the hits that we are seeing are what we think that they are. So it is a sampling, we're not going to be sort of tearing up the entire section. We're just going to be sampling the results of the GPR to be able to sort of say, oh, this type of feature that we're seeing on the GPR turns out to be a grave shaft. Therefore, we can extrapolate that the other types of readings that we find are going to be grave shafts as well. And we'll have those pinpointed through the GPR portion of the project. And then we'll sort of take a selection of those, excavate. We are either going to use a grade-all, which is what's pictured here, or my preferred method is just a backhoe with a 3-foot wide flat-bladed bucket. We basically sort of start at the, sort of beyond the area that we want to explore and just slowly scrape back in kind of inch deep scrapes to reveal changes in soil and definable features. So in a cemetery context, the grave shafts, which is principally what we're looking for, are usually pretty easily identifiable. There's a distinct soil change, and there's a sort of a linear squareness to a lot of the features that you can pretty clearly identify as something that has been dug into the ground purposefully, rather than an organic sort of mechanism. And the other thing that we find is usually we'll find elements of the soil like calcium carbonate nodules or something like that that come from a deeper section of the soil column. We'll find those much, much higher up, which basically means that the soil was removed and all mixed up together and then redeposited in that same hole. So we'll see a mixture of soil types in the soil column and a basically very clear linear definition. That's basically what we're looking for. If we see that, that's pretty clearly a grave shaft. And then sometimes we'll find other things as well. Actually, the cemetery I was just working on last week, we found pieces of plate and marine shells that were stuck, just plopped into the grave shaft after it was mostly buried, and then the topsoil was just laid on top. So we might find aspects like that as well, and we'll be recording those things as we go. And we'll continue on with that. We think we have a sort of a set amount of trenches that we're going to be excavating. And then once we sort of finish that and sort of define the features that we've seen in the GPR data, then the last section of our project is to complete a report of our findings, provide the city with all of our digital data so you can model it or use the GPS data. And we'll be using the sub-meter GPS to be able to plot any features or or elements in that acre site that we found. And we'll produce a report, hand it to you. We have, because this is a City of Bastrop project, we'll need to get a permit application, so there are some additional hoops we need to roll through to be able to satisfy the requirements of the permit. And once we finish that, then you will have the information that you need. Are there any questions? Yes.
How far does your radar go down in the ground?
It goes down until it hits something. So I've seen 3-4 meter deep
Okay.
GPR readings. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bear with me a second. I'm not really sure how I'm going to ask this question, but
Can you speak into the mic, please?
that
Yeah.
would help. Can you hear me now? You have this area that you're going to search,
Yes.
and then you're going to map out what you found.
Yes.
In what size increments do you map this out? I mean, is it going to be the whole area that you've done?
It
or is
won't.
it-
And we have, I believe, the track we are going
This is the map of the area up here.
to. Yeah,
I think it was
1
a-
acre site, and
Approximately
then
1 acre.
within that 1 acre site, I believe there were going to be GPR. Come on. So,
Let me ask my question
paperwork?
this way.
Yeah.
At present, are there any burials there now?
There are. Yes,
Okay.
there are monuments
Okay.
above ground
Okay.
in this section, and
Okay.
so we know that there's at least something there. What we're trying to identify is the places that the unmarked.
Sure. And I guess that's where I'm trying to go with this, and that is, will you be able to give different degrees or possibilities of something being there? Can you say absolutely in this area right here, there's nothing down there? Or
Yeah.
you can say that.
Yes, we can basically.
And what's your next category
The
that
next-
it may say?
We could easily say there's nothing here, there's something here,
Okay.
and then there might be some like ghost hits that we'll have. That's what we're going to be ground truthing more often
Okay.
than not, is identifying these sort of hits that we're not exactly clearly sure one way or the other, and we'll be able to sort of give a reasonable conclusion that this is an internment or not. Or we were even discussing a little bit about sort of other methods of internment, like cremation remains.
Okay.
We might be able to identify those as well.
So I'm
So-
assuming that once we determine that we want to sell some of these areas, some of
Mhm.
these plots, that we would have to know absolutely that there's nothing
Yes.
down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll be able to know that in some cases.
Yes.
And I guess
Yeah.
in those
if-
cases we're not sure, we're just going to have to decide what we're
You'll
going to
have
do.
to decide if you want to sort of, if we come up with a short list of like anomaly and we investigated it and turned out to be not a grave shaft or a cremation remains or remains of any type, then we could sort of, and once we get, sort of a preponderance of evidence saying, okay, this type of anomaly is definitely not a grave shaft, we'll be able to write that off.
Okay. I guess my bottom line question is when your company says that there's nothing down there,
Mm-hmm.
is that 100% sure?
It is not exactly. I can't 100% anything.
Well, I'm just trying to
but
say that,
if we go out with the GPR and we, the GPR records not even a squiggle in the results, then we could, say with sort of not absolute, but really.
I'm not
good
trying to put
assurance.
you on the spot.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to ascertain is if we happen to sell a lot
Mhm.
within the city, whoever's going to have the authority to sell this
Right.
lot,
Mhm.
we need to have some protection if there's nothing down there.
Right.
We have to say,
Mhm.
you dig at your own risk, or what would we say?
Well, there's always a chance that something will slip
Okay.
under the radar, but the chances of that happening are very, very small.
I think for purposes of people watching at home, we probably ought to back up and put this in just a little bit of context, because if they've walked up in the middle of this conversation based on your question, they're not sure what they've walked into. So the city of Bastrop bought the Fairview Cemetery in 1995, 2005, somewhere in there.
Yes.
And not all of the cemetery that we bought came with records. And one of the things that has been on the work plan for the cemetery board was to determine where there are graves in the area that we bought that didn't come with records. And our research has shown that ground truthing is the best science available to answer that question without digging up every grave site to affirm that with clarity. And so this process is intended to help with that. And once we have determined a possible grave site, we have a marker that is going to be placed to acknowledge the burial site of somebody that is interned there, with the expectation that in that acre, not all of those sites will be grave sites. So to Mr. Sanders' point, they will now be available for sale, which is why we're doing this ground truthing. It's two things. One, we need to make sure we know where the graves are in our cemetery, and then we also need to know where potential burial sites are. So if you walked into the middle of this conversation, that gives a little context as to why we're having this conversation this evening.
Yes, we're trying to determine where they are and also where they are not, as best as the science can be able to determine. So, are there any other questions? Do you want to go through the next couple of slides just really quickly?
I do have a question.
Yes.
I'm paging through here and I don't see anything about a cost. What is this costing us? Is it a bid?
Yes,
it
was sent for bid and we were awarded the contract. Yes.
Okay, but what is it costing the city of Bastrop?
I do not have the scope. Do you have the scope?
And is it a one-time? Is it a one-time?
It is a one-time
thing,
cost.
or will there be add-ons?
Nope.
I think it was around 24,000, Heather said, and we did budget that in this budget.
I assume we're assured there are no paper records in the districts, not in the Cemetery Association.
I was just shown the records that were available, and they are sort of, and there's a couple of copies further on in the workshop. But as far as we know, that is the only records that were available. So we, as part of the process, we're going to be attempting to match what we find with the GPR with the maps that we were able to obtain through the cemetery records. And then that will also assist us being able to sort of, if we can sort of tweak the map to be able to match what we're really seeing down there. We might be able to overlay that section and sort of find out where where things are marked on the map, and we might be able to sort of ascertain where those are in real life.
That being said, if anyone has any knowledge of additional documentation, it would be awesome to share that.
Yes. So this is the schedule of work. It's sort of the permit application is pretty much the first item, and that will be ready to go very shortly. As soon as we get the permit number, we'll be able to proceed with the GPR survey and the subsurface excavations. And we will pretty much be planning that as various individual schedules permit and weather permits. But we hope to be able to be out and doing the GPR and subsequent surface scraping sometime in February. So, and then we'll provide the data and then write the report. And I believe that there's a 6-month time frame, and that should be plenty of time. And, there's, I guess, if you want to go over the last slide with the alternatives and why we didn't do those, or. But, so I don't know if this is another piece of information in case anyone's interested. There are other methods of exploring subsurface without doing any ground disturbance, and this is some of them. And the reasons why they were not chosen, why we chose GPR as opposed to some of these other methods. Believe it or not, some of these actually do involve some ground disturbance, and we were hoping to have at least a map that had no ground disturbance associated with it. The resistivity, the connectivity, and the magnetometry stuff is also sort of difficult to pinpoint unless you know exactly what kind of soils you're dealing with. And we just felt that the GPR was a much superior method, especially in this case. So, I believe that's it.
Thank you, Mindy.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mindy. Appreciate that. Okay, Tracy, I believe you're going to go over some of the goals and work plans.
So, yes, first we wanted to just talk about the Cemetery Advisory Board and what its purpose is. The city acts as a permanent trustee for the perpetual care. So, you know, our Fairview Cemetery is a perpetual care cemetery. The advisory board recommends rules to the city council concerning the use, care, control, manage, restriction, and protection of the Fairview Cemetery. If there are variance requests that are from the ordinance, we have those presented to the board first. They discuss them. They actually take a vote on them, and then we pass them on to the next meeting of the council in order for them to be presented there as well. So they are an advisory board, but they do play a good role in, you know, preserving the cemetery and the rules there and the care and the safekeeping of the cemetery. Some of the accomplishments last year, we did a very detailed ordinance revision. At the direction of council, we went back to the board, we went through the ordinance. Most of the things that we were looking at were basically making sure that there was still safety in place, but that we wanted to respect the families and the loved ones, you know, for their loved ones that are buried there. So that was the way we looked at the ordinance changes. We're also looking at some tree issues. We have trees that need to come down and need to be replaced. There's some areas that don't have any trees at all that we would like to, you know, give some shade in those areas as well, so that we're trying to look at some of those areas. And proposing a memorial tree program. The board thought that was a very good idea, so we've been looking at other communities and seeing what they have in place and what will work for us as well. The ordinance revisions, like I said, mainly they were to allow the families to express themselves, but yet still be safe for everyone that goes out to the cemetery. We did stress that this does put a burden on the maintenance of the cemetery, and you know, those items were discussed at that time. This is just highlighting some of the sections where there were major changes. Mostly the restrictions were taken out. One of the things the board did talk about and is that we still wanted control over trees being planted. There are restrictions on planting, but as far as planting a tree, it's not allowed. We wanted to be able to control where those would be planted and what type of trees would be planted. So that's kind of where the memorial tree program blossomed.
One of the items that, and I wasn't here, so forgive me for not having the background, but I think the perspective from which that ordinance was reviewed may change. This year, one of the things that is occurring is an actuarial study, because we are a perpetual care cemetery. And that means we get it in perpetuity, and we have a responsibility in the future to take care of that. Most of your privately owned cemeteries that are perpetual care have a trust that is established, and fees are established for the sale of those grave sites, and contributions are made to that trust so that there is money to care for that in perpetuity. And we're having that study done so that we can now, while we still have a number of sites and areas that have not been developed, to make sure that we are selling them at an appropriate cost. Once that is established, we may determine that we need to adjust some of the maintenance that we have agreed to based on our ordinance, because of the perpetual care responsibility that we have in perpetuity. The reason I'm raising that is we don't have that information today. But once we get that actuarial study, I think a gut check would be appropriate to go back and say, now with this information, what are the right choices with our fee schedule, with our maintenance requirements, and that, is all of that lined up now, so that we're being good stewards of that resource for which we have an awesome responsibility to maintain in the future. So I just want to put that star that while you did it last year, there will be an opportunity this year to just go back and say, in light of this new information, is this still the right answer?
I just wanted to say a couple of things. Thank you to Linda, because this is the kind of stuff that makes me really happy that we hired you, that you have attention to these issues that were never addressed. But the other thing I just want to direct to the council, I think, and that is I personally really like the way that the restrictions have been changed, so that the cemetery just becomes a reflection of all the individuals that are in there, so people can really celebrate, you know, in a way that they see fit. And I mean, that's what I see, and I really like that. And I'm just wondering if the council, is that what you see with the way the restrictions have been lightened and expanded, or is there something you want to see more of?
Personally, I'd like to see the height restrictions removed. And I've done a little study here, which I'll pass around to you.
I will say that.
You finish real quick, and then the old section of the cemetery is in the first part of that. The new section of the cemetery is at the very end, and I feel like the new section of our cemetery is becoming everything looks alike, and it doesn't have as much personality as the old section. We have one of the most exemplary cemeteries in the state. We have war dead buried up there from the War of 1812 on. It's an exceptional, beautiful part of our city, and it's also an attraction for people coming into town. And when you look at the new section, you go, well, I don't need to walk around there, but I do want to walk around the other side. And it's one of my causes, has been for quite a while, that I'd love to see us take another look at the height restrictions, because it'll add character to the new section.
What do y'all think about that?
I will say that during the discussion of the heights, we did change it from 4 to 6 during the revisions. One of the concerns was just that if they are required to ask for a variance, we're able to look at how they're planning on stabilizing that taller monument, and that was really, I think, the main discussion of the height, was just to be able to be in the discussion of how they're going to stabilize something that's taller. And
So it is, so there is
they
an
can
avenue.
ask for a variance.
There's an avenue to go higher.
But does the public know that?
Yeah, maybe should be made, because you don't see that
I mean,
in
the
this.
ordinance, anything in the ordinance can be, they can ask for a variance on anything in the ordinance.
But to be customer service oriented, if the issue is stabilization, can we not publish criteria that if you are at a certain height or greater, this is how you have to stabilize it? Require whoever installs it to get a permit, and we go out and inspect it and just make it that way?
I would think the engineering on something like that would have to be pretty tightly defined.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as you can see, some of those monuments on the old side are 22. There's one that's 22 feet tall. Well, I doubt they had the engineering. I shouldn't say that. Engineering capabilities that we have now, but that's not necessarily true.
Well, I agree with what Linda said. I just think that we ought to, instead of just saying this is our restriction and everybody knows you can get a variance, I think that can be intimidating, and most people just want to fit in, and it's a real stressful time. I think we ought to just open it up and say, up to this height or over this height, you just need to make an application, just so that people see it. That's my only thing that I saw in there, that I just really want to encourage people to be able to celebrate and just really have the diversity reflected in the cemetery that we have in our community. So,
because I am not familiar with the how many companies in town service our cemetery from a marker standpoint?
Monuments.
Stoltz's does.
They come out of the area, maybe.
So is there 2 or 3? So it's an opportunity. We could invite them in, have a conversation. That could be a part of the solution of solving the problem, and tell us how they do it, and then we can write the rules to ensure that what they do that works is the way to do it. So I think this is a manageable process to fix.
Well, are there already standards from which variances can be requested?
Yes.
So those are already established, and so we're going to open up the standard to allow for a more personal approach, or?
I think that the conversation today will lead the cemetery board to have a chat about that and offer a recommendation. My request would be, if we're comfortable with it, don't make them work hard to do it. So if we don't have a problem with 20-foot monuments, then don't require a variance. Just go ahead and tell them, if you want a 20-foot monument, here's what it looks like, and here's how you have to install it. So I think this is a 2-part conversation. One is, I appreciate Councilmember Ennis going out and measuring them, because when you stand beside them, I don't know that you have a perspective that it's 18 feet or 22 feet and it's on a hill. Because I love old cemeteries like Councilmember Ennis does, I go to communities, and that's one of the things I ensure I drive through. And the newer subdivisions, I think, lack the personality and the history that the older cemeteries that I'm drawn to are. So as a community, if we don't have a preference, then for those that are passionate about it, we make it easy in a time of serious emotional uproar to do it, and we work with the companies that are going to be installing it, because I'm not, and I don't care. I just want the monument. So I think there's a way for us to protect the integrity, streamline the process so that my staff is not having to do this when at the end of the day you're fine with it. So if you're fine with it, let's just make it easy to do, but do it right.
But it puts the onus on the cemetery board to be very clear about, is it really just the stability, or is there a size that you're uncomfortable with? You need to really think about the parameters of that, and I think we need to be clear, and I know, Linda, this is what you're implying. It shouldn't just be make an application and it's approved. We need to say, if it's above a certain height, you need an engineered. We need to be clear about what the expectation is, so they don't think that it's just, well, if it's over a certain height, you just have to fill out a piece of paper. There are things that you want at a certain height, and that to the point, it needs to be clearly communicated and tied out with what the existing processes are. So it's not unlike what we do with some of our other ordinance, where here's the easy path, and if you want to do something else, you can. But here's the additional information we need to make sure that we're fair to everyone and that we're protecting the investment and protecting other folks that would be at the cemetery. So I just want confirmation. Is it only the stabilization? Is that the only issue that was discussed? Or that you guys have?
That was the only issue that I remember.
Please talk into the mic.
Your question, and I'll try to answer it. The stabilization was the only question that came up. We're concerned. Some people were concerned about the height of it, of course, causing a problem. I've never seen a structure out there fall down in my lifetime, but I guess that is a concern. But if I understand what you're asking, do you want a recommendation from this advisory board as to what we think should happen? We pass it on to you guys, because you guys have the final decision.
Right.
Is there an aesthetic issue? I think is the question here. You know, are we setting a standard that you can't have something bigger or wider? You know, one of the considerations you might want to think about as you try to pre-think where somebody might go with this is maybe there's a volume that if you go taller, you have to go narrower. You don't go more than X number of cubic feet, or you know, something along those lines. If you are looking at it from an aesthetic standpoint, that you don't just build a huge, I guess it can't be any larger than the plot, but if you buy a few plots, I suppose, and you built something 30 feet wide and 30 feet deep and 100 feet tall, you know, is that acceptable? You
just don't want the pendulum to swing so far the other way, and then now you are regretting that. Mr. Sanders?
If we make our recommendations to you guys, we can put parameters on that hopefully makes sense.
And that's what I'm looking. You guys have spent more time, more knowledgeable about it, and so we'd really like your recommendation of, okay, these are the parameters that we're comfortable with, and we realize that ultimately we're the ones that would be voting on the ordinance, but that's really one of the expertise that we would like from the advisory board. We've put some thought into it. We've talked to the community. These are the parameters that we recommend. That carries a lot of weight when we get ready to vote.
A suggestion, if there's only 3 monument companies, is that y'all have a work session and you invite them and get educated on the particulars of that, and they may tell you there's absolutely no problem, or this is where you run into a problem. And since we've got a very limited number using our cemetery, it seems that they could really provide some real critical expertise, and we could go from which we know and not from which we think.
Question. Are we running the risk of allowing, for lack of a better term, unfettered expression of personal desires? Do we run the risk of encroaching on another plot with that expression of personal consideration? Yeah.
I think that it would be fairly safe to say if they did, it was commensurate with their pocketbook, and they probably have enough money to buy 2 plots if they did that. These are extremely expensive investments. So the likelihood that is going to be something we encounter often is not likely, and I think that they can write restrictions that you buy the plot and here's the coverage that you can, but for it to be that significant, they've spent real money. They've bought a very expensive car or a small house. These are not cheap. Because what you're talking about is a slab of marble that's 8 feet by 4 feet and some on it, and the handiwork of that's going to be expensive.
Well, I just want to, my dad told me long ago, they're not making any more dirt, right? And inside a cemetery, that's especially true. And we're doing that ground proofing, And we could potentially, you can be selling a lot to someone that is surrounded by folks that are not going to come back and put up 8-foot monuments. So to Councilmember Nelson's point, we need, in my opinion, you need to kind of look at the big picture. And I have found in my experience that if you think that would never happen, that's likely to be the very first thing that's going to happen. So it's important to look at the boundaries.
Well, a good indication of that is to go up into the old section of the cemetery. I mean, that's your example right there.
And Councilmember Ennis, I don't disagree with that at all, but in the old section of the cemetery, all of the folks who were buying those plots were generally probably having very similar bank accounts to take care of that. And when we are going to have plots that are available not in that area, I just think we should be respectful of that.
I understand your point, but not necessarily in the old section.
I was straight, and now I'm confused. So, yes, it could happen. I don't think it will happen with the frequency, just given the cost. But help me with say what you were saying a different way, because I'm not sure I left with what you were intending.
So if I wanted a tower and I had a tower next to me, I'd have no problems. If I don't want a tower and I am in a row that has no towers whatsoever, if one person buys one and there's now suddenly a monument that is significant, does that change? Does that fit the character of what's around it? And I'm not saying that I know the answer. I'm asking that we think in the big picture.
A solution, because now that I understand what the mayor is saying, my family is buried in the Mulhern Cemetery in Monroe, Louisiana, and there are 4 or 5 different sections in that cemetery. And if you want a flat headstone, you're in this section. And if you want a 4-foot monument, you get to be in the section of Mary Hill.
Zoning.
Yes, in a cemetery. And so a way for y'all to do that is we've opened up a section and we sell it lot by lot. What we might need to think about is a holistic planning of our cemetery. To your point, is create that zoning and have a master plan for the cemetery, and then whoever comes in can be where they need to be.
Councilmember Nelson, I think that was your point, to just be respectful of what's already there.
Of those around you, yes. I think it's something that I agree that it's not going to occur at many times, but it could occur, and we need to be mindful of that. That's just a little thought process, which I'm sure y'all are undertaking.
And then we're right back to the beginning, which is that we have something that, as long as everything looks alike, then we're good with that. And I don't.
No, that's not what we're saying.
And so, can I continue to beat this dead horse?
Please.
I think that the zoning solves the problem of being respectful, but I think that it removes the issue that Councilmember Ennis started with in the old section. I think that's what gives it character, is that it's not side by side anything. I think that you might have some monuments, and then you might have a slab of marble that goes the length of the grave, and buried up in there is the unknown stagecoach driver that has a little tombstone in front of a tree. So not to predispose, but I think those would be interesting conversations for the cemetery to board to have, not necessarily that any one of them is right, but whatever is your answer and why do you think that matters? Because I think there are a million ways this could happen, none of which are wrong, but you came at it from one way, it switched to something else, and that's why y'all got appointed.
Well, that's a good point, because in the if you notice in the Wilbarger photo of the Wilbarger monument, directly behind that, I think it's 18 feet if my memory serves me right. Right behind that is the graves of the war babies, who were children of World War II soldiers stationed here, whose graves have since lost their designation. And thanks to Ms. Sanders, who did a lot of work in the cemetery, that portion of the cemetery is now marked with an angel and historical marker. But it's just flat. There's nothing there. But the Wilbarger, which is 18 feet, is next door to it. So, for what it's worth.
Welcome to our world. And yes, Mayor Scott, that's why you get the big bucks. So go forth and advise. We're happy to hear
I'll try to say this. I think our main job is to see that these problems don't come before the city council. And we've done a pretty good job at in the past, and we'll try to do it on this issue.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bless you, sir.
As long as you talk into the mic.
I don't know where we are on our agenda, but I have another item I'd like to bring up. The major improvements up there were largely done by volunteers. And I'm asking, would the city have any concerns about volunteers repainting some of them, getting involved in the upkeep, rather than just making it another city function?
We would absolutely be delighted for the assistance. Yes, sir.
You don't have to go get a permit to repaint or anything?
I think it needs to be coordinated. We just don't need to show up there with 4 volunteers decide that they wanted it pink instead of green. But as long as it is a coordinated effort, absolutely, we would appreciate the help.
I talked to David about it. I just wanted to bring it to y'all's attention.
And I think that really adds to the ownership. That is such a prize of this community, given its historical perspective. When my husband and I moved, I've spent hours in that cemetery. It is fascinating. And I think that we need to ensure the ownership, and the volunteers that come out and contribute to that just add to that ownership. So yes, sir, we would be delighted.
So the next agenda item is our work plan items, and we've touched on most of these already, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Linda has already talked about our perpetual care actuarial study. We've already met with a professor at Texas State that's going to assist us with this. So there's just some information in your agenda packet on this. There's a little more information here. Obviously, on our work plan is the ground truthing and GPR, and so we've already initiated that contract, and so we're moving forward with this project. Just want to let you know that these were the maps that she was talking about. I just hadn't got to the slide yet. So this is what we inherited from the association, which is what we work from in that section. And so it's just part of what a journey we're taking in trying to identify the plots in this section. This is a sample of some signs that we're going to have printed before they show up with their backhoe and their equipment. We're going to put out 4 or 5 signs along the road that just explain, a little bit and give them a number for them to call. We certainly don't want anyone to be taken aback by the activity that's going to be going on in that section. So these signs will be put up before they start. And then the Memorial Tree Program, this is something that we have worked with David Unick on, talking about which kind of trees that we would like to offer for the program. He has given us some assistance. These are the type of trees that we would like to plant in, that the city would like to plant in some of the sections that have no trees. And so I know that Heather has identified Block 1 and Block 8 really don't have any trees at all, and so we would like to take, 4 plots and put a good, nice sized tree in those, just to add to that. Did you have a question? And so these are the tree samples that we're looking at offering for the memorial program. And as far as the ground truthing, these are the methods that we plan on using to get the word out.
Tracy, when do we think that it's going to start?
She said February.
Mayor Scott, you have a quarterly Bastrop County Historical Society presentation. Your quarterly meeting guest speaker is coming up. I think it's a week from tomorrow, 2 weeks. It would be awesome if somehow you could mention that this is going to happen, because the Historical Society is a large group of folks that might have an interest and be curious of what's going out there, and that would be a way, another avenue of getting some information out. So if there's any way you could help us with that, I'm sure Tracy would be happy to provide you a slide or whatever, but I'm with Tracy. It would be better for people to know it's coming, but if you could help contact maybe through...
I'm not on that board, but I'll pass that message along.
I would really appreciate that. Or Tracy, maybe reach out to Kay or whatever.
We can get with
but I think there's normally a couple hundred people at that meeting, or 100 people at that presentation, and it could be 100 people that can tell their friends and get the word out better.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get
Just a
with them.
suggestion.
That's all we had as far as the workshop is concerned.
Mr. Sanders, do you not know what I'm talking about?
Pardon?
Do you know what the meeting I'm talking about, or am did I misspeak?
I'm not aware of the meeting right offhand, but I'm not in a position that I would be aware.
It's a quarterly meeting.
Well, Tracy, if you'd reach out to Kay, I'm sure that she would. I called her today and told her that I wasn't going to be able to be at the meeting, and I would have included this had I known to mention that to her. That would be a good way for us to partner with them and get the information out. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to give you an action item.
So that was all we had for the work session. We did have a few individual consideration items that we needed to handle quickly.
And you don't need council to do that, do you? So, council, I'll start with the cemetery board. Do you have anything else? We're in a workshop mode with the generalness of the posted items. Pretty much any other topic that you'd like council input in, we're certainly happy to visit about. Ms. Williams, Marvell, Cheryl, no? Council, anything else that you wish we would discuss?
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
It relates to the identification of the area that's referred to as the west side of the cemetery. It confuses me because it's more to the east side than west or northeast, and it confuses me that it's referred to as the west side, because typically it considers the black and copper section of the cemetery area.
The records are extremely old, and that is just always what they've called it.
Okay. It's historically referred to.
Yeah.
It's the other west.
Every time anybody, you're not the only one that gets confused out there. Anytime somebody gives me directions out there, they've lost me. That place doesn't run north and south.
So you guys might want to rename that so it makes better sense. So
I would just like to give Heather kudos. She put this whole PowerPoint together, and she gave y'all a lot of information. So
Yay,
I just
Heather.
appreciate
Thank
all
you.
her hard work.
City staff continues to do a fantastic job. I know, and council, I'll give council an opportunity to speak, but I want to tell each and every one of you how much I appreciate your time. Your time is valuable. You don't have to do this. It's a benefit for the community. The work that you put in, Mr. Sanders, to your point, it certainly is helpful to us if you guys are addressing things and it's not blowing up in city council meeting. We're happy to make the hard decisions, but it's very, very helpful when we have advisory boards that are dedicated like you are, and I just want to thank each of you for serving on the board.
If they get too hard, we'll definitely pass them on.
We appreciate that. We'll appreciate that. And we can always send them back to you, so that's not a problem. Council, would anyone else like to?
I said, in that
yes,
vein, I want to compliment the city staff. That cemetery is really,
Yeah. There's nothing but compliments. City staff doing a great job.
Fantastic. Thank y'all very much. It's nice to hear. Council, anybody else want to say anything? All right, it's 8:28, and the council portion of this joint meeting is adjourned.
Do we have anything left for
Yes,
the advisory board?
We have a few items.
Okay.
Go ahead and flip over to the next page. 4A.
4A, consider action to approve minutes from the October 4th meeting. Would anybody like to do that? I'm assuming the October 4th meetings are here.
Yes, they were in the packet.
Boy, I got it.
No one has any questions? Yeah. Oh, again. Now, when we get the heavy machinery out, we're going to have to ask you to stay back. But yes, if you guys want to come out and watch us work, you're welcome to it.
And the signage sounds good too. A lot of people do wondering.
Yeah, like what's going on? Yeah. Especially when we get the heavy machinery out, people get worried.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be signage is going to be very helpful. But yes, especially in public venues, public spaces, parks, and things like that. We're used to having people come up and say, yes, so that's to be expected. We're happy to
This is your first meeting?
sort of touch
Oh, the 4th one?
we're hoping weather is a big thing, so we're hoping February, but we'll be coordinating with the city staff, sort of just to make sure that we have stars in mind, exactly, but we're hoping February, so.
Were you at the last meeting? I was.
Yeah, I was.
I think Mary wants to approve those meetings. If you would like, you can second them.
I'll second them.
Okay. Yeah.
Cheryl seconded.
Yeah.
Okay. That's 4A. 4B. Here representation of the financial report for the period ending December 31st.
So I just wanted to point out a few things about the first quarter of our fiscal year. Sales is above projection at this point. We've been very, very busy at the cemetery. Also, the one piece of equipment that we purchased came in below budget. We also had an opportunity to buy a very small piece of land during a tax sale that fronts the cemetery in the front. And so you'll see that we actually spent $3,400 on real property during the quarter, which we'll be able to absorb that.
Was that lot running
It's just
right
a tiny
below?
little slither that went up for sale, but it's adjacent to land we already owned.
Right.
So we felt like it was important that we go ahead and secure it while it was there. Yep. And that's really all, and everything else is pretty standard, pretty normal. So unless you have any questions for me, the financials.
I have a question about the financials.
Okay.
How do you reconcile the difference between the revenue and the expenses?
How do I reconcile the
Yeah, I don't
difference?
see any entry for usage balances or anything like that.
Well, we brought in 31, we spent 29. That's just a ending quarter. This really is just to reflect, here's the budget that y'all adopted, that council approved, and here's where we are in the first quarter.
Okay, but I'm looking at, let's just look at the current budget. We anticipate revenue of 90,000 and change. We're going to spend 131,000.
Yes.
So where's the reconciliation of that? How do we spend more than we have revenue?
Because we have fund balance.
Okay. Shouldn't we reflect that in our budget overview?
Sure. We did it when we adopted the budget. I think this even shows, I've got a slide here that gives you, this is the budget page out of the budget book. And so we had 198,742 of fund balance at the beginning of the year. we chose to use some of that fund balance to do some of these, the GPR, the ground truthing. We needed a new mower desperately, and hopefully we'll continue to do some road maintenance out there. So we are dipping into fund balance a little bit. It was planned.
It's just on our report. Okay, that was 4C, that's where we were? No, that's 4B, I believe. 4B. I'd like to ask a question before we go any further. It's clarification on something that was said tonight. I believe the city manager was saying that we need to review our lot charges. Is that what she was saying earlier? Did I understand that correctly?
She was just explaining that we will be doing a actuarial study. It's a work plan item this year, and so we will be bringing that information back to you. It hasn't been done yet, so once it's done, we will bring that information to you.
Okay.
The concern we have is that right now all of our fees are going into operations. Nothing is going into the permanent fund.
Yeah.
And we feel like we need to be directing some of those fees into the permanent fund, because that permanent fund is what will fund this cemetery when all lots have been sold and there's
Sure.
still maintenance that needs to occur. So
Yeah, I think I understand.
she's
that part.
just saying that if the study determines that we need to raise our fees in order to cover the long haul, because he's going to look, the study is going to take us into the future.
Yeah.
And so we're going to address it at the time of the study.
Well, I just made the assumption if you needed more money, that's the only place you can get it is from the sale of lots. But anyway, Anyway, and so that's something we may be doing, or y'all may be doing, the city may be doing. That answers that question.
Mm-hmm.
I had another question, if I can recall it. Let it go for now. Oh, putting something on the agenda for next time. Would this be the appropriate time to put on the agenda to see if we can get some monument companies, 2 or 3 of them, to come down and give us
Yes,
their
I think
thinking?
that I know Heather's been over there making notes during this workshop. So, any suggestions that were made, we will make sure that those are included on future agendas.
Super.
For sure, yeah. I think that would be a great idea.
I mean, does that mean it's going to be on our next meeting?
If we can make it happen, yes.
Okay,
we'll.
super. That was my question.
I have a question.
I guess Debbie said here in a minute.
Add
Yeah.
that one tree, the link that's chocolate tree. It's a hardy, very hardy tree.
Okay.
It's not a native plant, actually native to Arizona.
Okay, well, I honestly, I'm gonna defer to the Parks Department, who knows a lot more about trees than I do,
Does it have to be on the agenda?
to put it in the
To add it to
program.
the trees, yeah.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, we were still building the program.
Okay, because it's a very incredibly beautiful tree. It's graceful even when it doesn't have leaves on it.
Well, I'll let David look at it. See what he thinks. All right, so I think we're actually on an agenda item.
I'm seeing 4C may be next,
Yes.
and that's to establish the next board meeting.
Yes. So if we continue on our quarterly trends, we would be looking at April 11th.
Sounds good to me.
Is that after Easter?
I'm not
I
sure
think
when
Easter's
Easter
like
is,
really
but
early.
then it
Because
probably
it hits
is.
like when the antique show is.
So it's a Wednesday, which is kind of been our traditional day.
Yeah.
4 o'clock. Unless anybody has any issues with that.
You get in. Everybody good with it?
I'm good.
Okay. Big number 5. Very privileged motion. And turn. Did you make a motion? I move with it. There being no further business. If I can, I'll take it. All right.
I think they did y'all. I adjourned. Yeah. Heather, we're adjourned.
Let me ask you. Let me ask an embarrassing question. I didn't understand what the.
Maybe we should wait.
Yeah. I don't.